The world was not prepared for what hit Netflix on Tuesday, December 2nd. People opened the app expecting another messy celebrity documentary, some drama, some gossip, a little nostalgia. Instead, they clicked play on something that felt nothing like entertainment and everything like an indictment. The reckoning didn't roll out, it detonated. In the first 24 hours, timelines flooded with shocked reactions. Viewers watched not just old clips and rumors, but a cold, structured breakdown of Diddy's alleged darkest behavior. His charm stripped away, his power stripped away, replaced by patterns, timelines, receipts. And while the outside world binged the episodes on couches and phones, inside a federal prison cell, one man watched his legacy get dismantled in real time with no way to change the channel. Before we go deeper into how this documentary shook Diddy inside those walls and pushed him toward a move nobody expected, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss a single update as this story keeps unfolding. From the opening minutes of The Reckoning, the tone was clear. This wasn't storytelling, it was dissection. The series walked through dim corridors, quiet hotel suites, and long-buried nights with unnerving precision. Survivors didn't speak in vague phrases. They gave details, times, places, repeated behaviors. Old photos appeared next to new testimony. Audio clips backed up rumors people had whispered for years. It felt less like a documentary and more like the case file the public was never supposed to see. By the end of episode 1, social media had already made up its mind. This wasn't just bad press. This was the kind of exposure you don't come back from. Reaction channels were overwhelmed. TikTok feeds turned into a nonstop stream of breakdowns, slowed footage, zoomed-in screenshots, voice analysis. Twitter threads stitched together old headlines, lawsuits, and now Netflix frames into one brutal timeline. And somewhere far from all of that noise, behind concrete walls and steel doors at Fort Dix, the echo reached Diddy anyway. Inside prison, news doesn't travel. It spreads. A CO mentions the documentary. An inmate catches a headline during rec. A printed article slides under someone's door. It doesn't take long before everyone knows. There's a new Netflix series, and Diddy's not just in it. He's the entire plot. The Reckoning becomes all anyone talks about in the yard. Inmates who grew up on his music now watch his name trend for all the wrong reasons. At first, Diddy tries to treat it like static, background noise, something outside that can't touch him in here. But the problem is, in 2025, nothing stays outside. Family members mention it on monitored calls. A guard casually says, "You seen what they dropped about you?" With that tone that isn't curiosity, it's judgment. Someone slides a printed article to another inmate within eyesight of his cell. The headline alone is enough to light a fire. Documentary exposes Diddy's darkest years. The 4-part series is impossible for him to ignore. He hears people in the day room talking about that hotel footage, that phone call, that story that matches exactly what was rumored back then. He's trapped in a place where every rumor becomes currency, and every new detail about him is suddenly up for public consumption among men who have nothing but time. For the first time in his career, he isn't controlling the narrative. He's the subject of it. In his cell, the humiliation hits in waves. He imagines the scenes, his younger self on screen, his voice layered over accusations, his alleged behavior lined up like chapters. He thinks about people he thought would stay silent forever now speaking in high definition with subtitles underneath their pain. He thinks about the way the documentary frames him, not as a complicated genius, but as a repeating pattern. Outside, the internet keeps saying the same 4 words. This documentary changes everything. Inside, those words sound like a verdict. Guards notice the shift in him before he speaks on it. He paces more. His jaw is tighter. Small inconveniences trigger bigger reactions. When someone mentions that episode 3 is trending #1 worldwide, he doesn't laugh it off. He looks away, like the words burned his skin. This isn't embarrassment anymore. This is something heavier, an identity collision. For decades, he was the one in control of rooms, of deals, of music, of stories. Now millions of strangers are watching a version of him he can't interrupt, can't edit, can't spin. And one name keeps cutting through all the noise: 50 Cent, the man behind the project, the one whose voice calmly guides viewers through Diddy's alleged worst nights, the one the internet is now calling the guy who finally exposed him. In the yard, inmates mention 50's name like a punchline. On the phones, people tell their loved ones, 50 really did him dirty with this one. Even in passing, that name lands differently for Diddy. It's not just a business rival anymore. It's the person the world is crediting for blowing his image apart. The more the reckoning spreads, the more it tightens around Diddy like a vice. Every new meme, every new clip, every new headline is another reminder that his past is being replayed without his permission. The embarrassment curdles into anger. The anger hardens into something darker. He stops talking as much in common areas. He spends longer stretches just staring at the wall. Not vacant, calculating. Because from his point of view, this didn't happen by accident. Someone did this. Someone packaged his worst rumors, his worst nights, and his worst allegations into a global event. Someone turned his name into a 4-part public trial. And in Diddy's mind, that someone doesn't just deserve blame, he deserves a message. By the end of those first few days after December 2nd, one thing inside that cell is clear. Diddy isn't just humiliated by the reckoning. He's activated by it. And while the world keeps streaming the documentary, inside Fort Dix, he's quietly deciding how he's going to answer it. Fort Dix changed the moment the reckoning went viral. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It became the prison's central storyline. Every inmate had an opinion, every guard had a reaction, and every whispered conversation circled back to one man: Diddy. By the third day, the documentary wasn't just something people watched. It was something they dissected. Inmates gathered around the dayroom TV like analysts covering a breaking scandal. They replayed scenes, argued over details, compared old allegations with what Netflix exposed. Some inmates laughed bitterly, shaking their heads. Others watched quietly, studying Diddy not like a celebrity, but like a case study. And he felt every pair of eyes on him. Power in prison doesn't come from fame. It comes from perception. And after the documentary, that perception shifted instantly. The man who once walked the yard with a kind of untouchable aura now moved under a spotlight he didn't consent to. People weren't impressed anymore. They were curious. They were entertained. Some were emboldened. And the worst part? They were no longer afraid to look at him differently. Even the guards weren't subtle. One guard passing by his cell casually mentioned, "Episode 3 is wild," knowing exactly what that episode contained. Another guard paused just long enough to say, "You seeing the news outside?" With a tone that wasn't concern, it was amusement. Each comment was a reminder that Diddy's image wasn't collapsing out in the world. It was collapsing right where he lived. Inside his cell, the pressure built like steam in a sealed room. He replayed scenes in his head, the interviews, the timelines, the cold tone of narration that stitched everything together into a portrait of someone the public now saw as a monster. Every allegation he thought he buried was now trending worldwide, amplified by millions of viewers who didn't know him, yet felt like they did. The more he watched that perception form online, the more something inside him snapped out of humiliation and into obsession. This wasn't just bad press. This wasn't a scandal. This was war. His pacing grew more aggressive. His muttering grew more frequent. At night, guards reported hearing him talk to himself, voice tense, footsteps sharp, like he was preparing for a confrontation no one else could hear. And one name kept returning in those murmurs. To Diddy, the documentary wasn't Netflix's doing. It was 50 Cent's weapon. A deliberate, calculated hit piece intended to ruin him permanently. Not just financially, not just publicly, spiritually, emotionally, historically. The idea consumed him. He thought about decades of rivalry, old interviews, business competition, petty jabs exchanged online. Every little moment added weight to the belief that this documentary was personal, not an accident, not an opportunity, an attack. And that belief changed everything. Instead of shrinking away from the humiliation, he fixated on retaliation. He stopped engaging with other inmates. He cut off conversations mid-sentence. He ate faster, slept less, stared longer at the wall like it was a strategy board only he could see. Even routine things like signing forms or requesting commissary were done with a different energy. Sharp, focused, controlled. The men around him didn't know what he was planning, but they knew he was planning something, because when a man loses his reputation, he loses the mask he's been wearing. And when the mask breaks, the real face appears, the one that isn't performing, isn't negotiating, isn't charming. And that real face is the one that decides what happens next. Inside Fort Dix, the shift was clear. Diddy wasn't just reacting to the reckoning, he was preparing to answer it. By the fourth day, the obsession boiling inside Diddy turned into something far more dangerous, a need to reclaim control, not through interviews, not through statements, through action. Guards started noticing unusual behavior. He wasn't lashing out. He wasn't arguing. He was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from someone thinking, calculating, arranging pieces in his head. One officer reported that Diddy spent nearly an hour hunched over a notebook, writing furiously, ripping out pages, rewriting them, folding each sheet with precision that looked nothing like the casual letters inmates normally send. It wasn't communication, it was preparation. Then came the requests, subtle at first. He asked about outgoing mail procedures. He asked when envelopes were distributed. He asked which days outgoing items were processed. Not once. Multiple times, always in the same tense, clipped tone. For a man who built an empire on influence, sending a message from behind bars must have felt like the last piece of power he still controlled. Meanwhile, the reckoning spread like wildfire outside. Every platform was flooded with clips, theories, breakdowns, commentary, and the more the world talked, the more pressure built inside the prison. Inmates passed printed headlines to each other. Some mocked him. Some stared with cold curiosity. A few, the dangerous ones, simply watched him without blinking, like the documentary had revealed a weakness they hadn't noticed before. By day 5, Diddy wasn't pacing anymore. He was steady, focused, calm in a way that unsettled both inmates and staff. He moved differently, deliberate, almost rehearsed, like someone waiting for the moment when his next move would land outside these walls. And that moment arrived in the form of a small, seemingly harmless package delivered to a location tied to 50 Cent's production team. At first, it looked unremarkable. A box, no special markings, no signature. But inside was something unmistakable, a bouquet of white lilies arranged with eerie care. Funeral flowers. Flowers people send when they want to deliver a message without speaking a word. But the real explosion came from the handwritten note tucked between the stems. 4 words, "This is your warning." The production assistant who opened it froze. Not because the flowers were strange, because the note felt intentional. Heavy strokes, sharp angles. The handwriting of someone writing through anger, not emotion. Security locked down instantly. No one touched the bouquet. No one spoke above a whisper. The timing was too precise, too aligned with Diddy's mail requests, too connected to his sudden calm. Behind the scenes, 50 Cent's team began dissecting every detail. Delivery time, origin point, courier information. The more they analyzed, the more the suspicion tightened around one conclusion. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. This was personal. And inside Fort Dix at that exact hour, Diddy sat on his bunk with a stillness described by guards as chilling, like a man who had already sent the message he wanted the world to receive. Because humiliation may have broken his public image, but revenge was repairing his pride. The turning point didn't come from a dramatic confession or a slip-up. It came quietly inside a small office at Fort Dix, when a prison investigator placed 2 sheets of paper side by side. On one, the handwritten note found inside the bouquet sent to 50 Cent's team. On the other, a routine inmate request form signed by Diddy just days earlier. The match wasn't subtle, it was undeniable. The pressure strokes lined up. The slanted word endings lined up. So even the emotional weight behind the handwriting lined up. The investigator didn't need software or specialists. He leaned back in his chair with one realization. Diddy didn't just react to the reckoning, he escalated. Within minutes, the warden was alerted. A special meeting was called. Guards who had monitored Diddy's recent behavior were questioned. Mail logs were pulled, surveillance stills, Frames of Diddy folding a note with unnatural precision were printed and placed on the table. The room fell silent. They weren't dealing with a rumor. They were dealing with a threat. And outside the prison, the story detonated across the internet. 50 Cent posted a close-up of the handwritten warning. No caption, just the message. The reaction was instant and explosive. Comment sections filled with speculation. Blogs dropped emergency updates. YouTubers recorded breakdowns before the algorithm could even catch up. TikTok users compared handwriting samples like amateur forensic analysts. The public didn't need confirmation. They had already made up their minds. Diddy sent the warning. Diddy crossed the line. Diddy was spiraling. Inside Fort Dix, the consequences hit even faster. Diddy was placed under restricted communication monitoring, a measure rarely used unless officials fear an inmate may attempt to influence, intimidate, or retaliate from behind bars. His mail privileges were reviewed. His calls were monitored more closely. His movements were logged with new scrutiny. When the warden confronted him, Diddy didn't flinch. He didn't deny, he didn't explain. He simply stared ahead with a cold, unreadable expression, one that guards later described as a man who already accepted the fallout. And the fallout was massive. 50 Cent's team upgraded security. Cameras were added. Access points tightened. Personal protection doubled. What began as a documentary had turned into a message war. The reckoning didn't just expose Diddy's past, it provoked his present. It triggered a response. It pushed him into territory no publicist, no lawyer, no reputation could defend. Because sending flowers isn't illegal. But sending funeral flowers with a handwritten threat? That's a whole different story. And from the moment that note surfaced, the narrative shifted forever. This wasn't celebrity drama anymore. This wasn't a downfall. This was a dangerous escalation between a man behind bars and the man who exposed him to the world. A conflict that was no longer symbolic, but personal,